Thank you, Alessa, for this kind introduction. Today, I'm delighted to be the first one to start this series of seminars organized by my Department of Government and International Studies, and with a subject which is very related to current developments, the COVID-19 crisis and the Chinese political landscape in the shadow of that crisis. And we all have in mind a lot of questions regarding the crisis. The two overarching questions have to do with, on the one hand, Chinese domestic politics, whether Xi Jinping or even the regime has been weakened by this crisis or consolidated by this crisis. And the second question is whether this crisis has sort of accelerated the move of our world towards a new Cold War or a new kind of confrontation between China and the United States. But just before I was moving to this room to start this seminar, I was able to download this latest document from the US National Security Council called United States Strategic Approach to the People's Republic of China, which clearly, I mean, it's a 16-page document, which clearly worries for good, I would say. All right, I think I may resume this presentation from the very beginning. I was telling you that just before coming to this room, I downloaded a new document from the United States Security Council on the new strategic approach to the PRC, which kind of is a further indication or latest indication of the US intention to bury for good the engagement policy, which was initiated more than 40 years ago by the previous American administration. I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint. I hope all of you can see it now on the screen, which is trying to sort of address these two broad issues. And I think we have to start looking at the domestic issue by what we've been looking back at what has happened in China since the end of last year, all the way to the recent development. And then we're going to look at the international implications of this COVID-19 crisis. I think it's fair to say to start with, yes, I hope now we'll be okay to start this presentation on COVID-19. And what I'm interested in is, of course, China and the Chinese political landscape in the shadow of this COVID-19 crisis. Now, I think it's fair to say that, to start with, that every country was very ill prepared to this crisis. That there's been, we'll come back to that, some cover-up, both at the local and central level. We'll go in the detail of what we know about the decision-making processes in China regarding how to handle this crisis. Between the first case was detected in Wuhan on the 17th of November, all the way to the 20th of January, when the central leadership of China decided to mobilize the whole nation against this new virus and to lock down Hubei province and Wuhan city. And now, the origin of the virus is this new coronavirus is still undetermined, whether it's a wet market where white animals were on sale in Wuhan, or whether it's a lab where some new viruses were studied and tested. We don't know. The only thing we know is that this new coronavirus, is zoonotic in the sense that it's been transmitted from animals to humans, but that's where the debate opens as far as China and the rest of the world are concerned. Two things which have, with kind of contrasting this current crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, with the SARS crisis, which took place 17 years ago in China and Hong Kong, is that this time the Chinese government informed the WHO, the World Health Organization, much earlier. We didn't wait for 3 months, but as soon as the end of December, the WHO was informed of this new coronavirus. What the WHO didn't know, and China didn't know either at the time, is whether that new virus could be transmitted between human beings, between humans. We also know, I mean, that's been highly reported by world media, that some whistleblowers, as Li Wenliang but others, were censored very early in January and repressed or reprimanded for having informed the public by email and the internet about this new virus. And we also know now, because of a Standing Committee Politburo meeting, which took place in early February, which was reported in the media in mid-February, that Xi Jinping, actually, the Chinese president, was informed about this new epidemic as early as January 7th. And what we don't know is what happened between January 7th and January 23rd. According to reports we have, is being able to get, coming from official media, is that, of course, the Chinese leadership was worried about this new epidemic, but wanted to keep giving priority to economic development and to achieving the goals of doubling the GDP of the country between 2010 and 2020. So, in other words, the economy still had priority against the fight, over the fight against the virus, at least until the 20th of January. Another thing which has been on the positive side compared to 17 years ago is the fact that the Chinese scientists actually publicly shared the genetic sequence of the COVID-19 pretty early in January, on the 12th of January. Now, the worrying side of this crisis in China was the fact that human transmission was not reported by China before 20th of January. And in other words, China wasted maybe 3 weeks, and the rest of the world also wasted 3 weeks before deciding lockdown of Wuhan and the Hubei province. And that has contributed to turning this epidemic into a pandemic around the world. Because as we know, it has been also reported officially by local officials in China, 5 million people left Wuhan before the 23rd of January, out of a population of 14 million people. So that was the situation when the lockdowns was decided on the 23rd of January. And what we know as well, I mean, by Chinese social media, is that the public in China became pretty worried about what's happening, and that the silencing of Li Wenliang and others was very badly resented within the society. Even if, according to more recent media, actually the first whistleblower was a scientist of one of Wuhan hospitals, but he didn't report to the outside. He just reported within the system about this new virus. Now, medical staff in Wuhan and Hubei were under heavy pressure, and they were pretty under stress during most of January and February because of the lack of protective equipment, the lack of staff, and it took some time for the government to send people to Wuhan. We all know about how fast the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, built a country hospital near Wuhan in order to accommodate more patients. And we know as well that a lot of medical personnel was sent by Beijing later in January and early February. Around 40,000 staff was sent to Wuhan and Hubei province to meet to face the crisis. Now, what is interesting from a political point of view is that it's not Xi Jinping who led the leading group in charge of fighting against the new epidemic, but Li Keqiang, the prime minister, who went to Wuhan in late January after the Politburo member in charge of health, Sun Chunlan, had visited the city a bit earlier. But Xi Jinping was very much still in the driving seat, in the sense that among the key members of this new leading group, you had someone who was in charge of security in the party, Chen Yixin, who is the general secretary of the party's Central Commission for Law and Politics, which is in charge of public security for the whole country. And he was dispatched and sent to Wuhan in order to keep social stability and to supervise the relief operation and the management of the crisis. Now, well, we know as well that there's been some reaction very quickly within the central leadership again to the mismanagement of the crisis by the local authorities. And later, actually, Xi Jinping at this Politburo meeting in mid-February admitted that, in early February, admitted that actually the government system of China had faced some shortcomings and difficulties during that period of time. So clearly, there was a sense that something had to be amended. And some people and some local officials were penalized and sacked in the early days of February. I mentioned a few. Here you've got a few information about that. 337 officials, plus more importantly the key party officials of Hubei and Wuhan City. Replaced by leaders who are very close to Xi Jinping, and that's another indication that Xi Jinping was very much in charge of all these changes. Yin Yong is a very close ally, very good ally of Xi Jinping, coming from Shanghai. What is interesting, he was coming from Shanghai in 12th of February, transferred from China, after actually had decided to protect Shanghai from the virus very early on. What is interesting in the case of Shanghai, the lockdown was decided much earlier than the rest of the country, around the same time as in Taiwan. And that's something we can come back to in the discussion. Now, let's move on to what has happened since then. And Xi Jinping was probably making decisions from behind, but he was not very much in the limelight. And we had to wait until the 10th of March to see Xi Jinping visiting Wuhan and to sort of congratulate people of Wuhan for what they had been going through, and he called them heroes. And what was interesting, it was in contrast to the way he addressed people of Wuhan and Hubei province, and the gratitude campaign which had been launched by Wang Zhonglin, the new Wuhan party secretary. Gratitude of Wang Zhonglin had asked the people of Wuhan to show their gratitude toward the party for having well taken care of them. And actually, in Wuhan at the time, the mood was very different. The mood was a mood of resentment, of distrust. And a few days earlier, Sun Chunlan had visited some districts and urban district of Wuhan, where she had been, some people had tried to attract her attention to the fact that everything which had been prepared by local officials were fake. So clearly there was some resentment within the society that the party had to address. And very quickly, I think that's for the reason, they decided to rehabilitate Li Wenliang, to sort of change the verdicts about Li Wenliang. So very early on, you can see 4th of February, the Chinese Supreme Court decided that the 8 whistleblowers should not have been punished. Then the party sent a National Supervision Commission delegation to investigate about the case of Li Wenliang and others. And then Li Wenliang, who had died of COVID-19 himself in early February, was turned into a morphine in early April. So clearly, there was a need for the party to 平反, as we say in Chinese, 真的verdict is about 原谅, and to sort of in doing that, to reach out and try to reconcile with the local population of Wuhan and Hubei province. Now, on the other political level, what we've seen since then, we've seen an intention of the central leadership to relaunch reforms and to move the economy more on the towards marketization, and that started in early April with a few documents issued by the State Council of Central Government. And that's been going on all the way to today's NPC meeting, which starts tomorrow, as you know, and which is going to approve some decision going in the same direction. Now, what is interesting is many of the reforms which have been proposed by the State Council and Central Leadership of the party since early April were actually not that new. They had already been approved by the party in 2013 at the third plenum of the State Committee, and but many of them had remained on shelf because of Xi Jinping's priority given to the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, and to keeping the economy under the control of the strategic sectors of the economy kept under the control of the party leadership. Now, from domestic political point of view, there's been a lot of speculation of what happened in February and early March in China. Would have been a Chinese Chernobyl, and that Xi Jinping had been put in difficulties because of that crisis. Actually, that's not what happened. For one reason is a thing which is very simple, that Xi Jinping is far to be compared to Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, and is maybe the anti-Gorbachev more than anything else. So I don't think it would have been ready to accommodate some of the criticism which could be seen on Chinese social media in that period of time. Yet, what is interesting to observe is that since April, we've seen less pictures of Xi Jinping in the media, less references to Xi Jinping's thought, and that's something we have to come back to later to sort of try to see what is the real status of Xi Jinping and what is his political future as China is moving out of the crisis now. What is clear is that something happened in Hubei and in China that affected, as I mentioned here, the party-state-society relationship, and trust, and as I said earlier, has been damaged. We've seen quite a number of critical voices inside and outside of China. When I mentioned outside of China, I mentioned some Chinese students studying overseas who have also aired their view on social media. And most of those voices have been very quickly silenced, and quite a number of dissidents have been arrested. Now, there's been well-known academics like Professor Su Zhongrun, who already has been known for some time for his critical view of Xi Jinping's intention to stay in power for more than 10 years. Xi Jinping is very conservative-leaning. Another professor, Ko Weifang, law professor of Beijing University, is also very critical of Xi Jinping. And those academics have been very also here in that particular case very critical of the way the government has handled the crisis. What is also interesting is among the critical voices, you've seen someone like Zhen Ziqiang, who's well known for his liberal views. He went very far in accusing Xi Jinping of being a clown, and maybe was hoping to take advantage of his close connection to Wang Qishan for not being detained. Eventually, he disappeared. He's probably in detention now. In a context where, and that's something I mentioned in brackets, is where Xi Jinping's relationship with Wang Qishan seemed to have deteriorated very quickly, according to repeated rumors in China. Of course, activists have been heard and posted quite a number of messages on the social media, and those activists have been arrested, and then including Zhu Yong, who's well-known pro-democracy activist. But more unusual development has been also the detention or sentencing of a number of lawyers and journalists, and also doctors like Ai Fen, who's well-known, who is a well-known doctor based in Wuhan. So I mentioned a few names here. I mean, the latest arrest was Zhang Zhang's arrest just a few days ago. Now, there's been also a lot of controversy about Fang Fang, who's a well-known author, and her Wuhan diary, which is about to be translated into English, but also German, as far as I know, and which has been viciously attacked by nationalists in China, particularly when the diary got that translation in the pipeline. So you see a Chinese society which is more polarized, and maybe reflecting some divisions within the Communist Party. Of course, the Communist Party itself is pretty opaque, and the NPC meeting tomorrow will be an occasion for the party to show a face of unity and support for Xi Jinping and the president. But at the same time, there's been some developments which are, I think, indicative of some tensions within the party. A very maybe minor detention was the corruption case launched after Sun Liqun. Sun Liqun belongs to a group within the security apparatus who's very close to the Shanghai clique, including Meng Jiazhu and others. Meng Jiazhu is retired, but Sun Liqun has been arrested. Meng Hongwei, the former head of Interpol, was also arrested, but for reasons which are maybe not necessarily linked to real case of corruption, but more for political differences with Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping asks total loyalty to everyone in the party system, and one of the accusations has been made public of Sun Liqun is to be not loyal enough in Chinese, 不知敬畏. So I think it's probably fair to say that within the party itself, some people have tried to take advantage of the COVID-19 crisis to weaken Xi Jinping and maybe compromise his political future after 2022, when the next party congress takes place. Now, it also explains, I mean, these tensions within the Chinese society, or between the society and the party state, may also partly explain at least the Communist Party's much more aggressive discourse, or what has been called its wolf warrior diplomacy, which has developed in the last few months on the international stage. Now, today the domestic priorities are clearly the ones indicated here, with some hesitation between stabilizing the economy and stimulating the economy with big financial packages. The limit being that the Chinese state and Chinese SOEs are already pretty much indebted, so China doesn't enjoy as much room for maneuver to stimulate the economy the way it did in 2008, 2009 after the global financial crisis. So on the one hand, you can see an intention to relaunch reforms, and the document which was issued by the State Council on the 18th of May, I have the title in Chinese, is basically to improve the market economy, is going to be approved by the NPC meeting, and which it should favor, well, the private sector, but also help the economy save or create more jobs at a time when you see unemployment increasing very quickly in urban areas to a level which is much higher than the one officially announced. It should be around 20% more than 6-7% actually. After a decline of the economy, which nearly reached 6.7% in the first quarter of this year. So that's the reason why you can see at the bottom of this slide that the party leadership has decided to not to take any chance and to strengthen domestic security. And what the public security minister has called political security, which has clearly become a priority for the Chinese leadership today. Now, on the international stage, we've seen China has been very active. The Chinese government tried to take advantage of the crisis to promote its own way of managing the crisis. It's a success story within China, and also trying to reach out more larger number of countries in order to sort of show the world that it's the best great power the world can rely on to put an end to the crisis. The problem with the Chinese government's action outside of its borders during the COVID-19 crisis is that there's been too much overkill. On the one hand, you've got that diplomacy of generosity, which was to sort of distribute masks and PPEs around the world, to present itself as the best pupil of the WHO, and to show other countries, how to operate and to sort of be the role model in terms of managing the health crisis. The problem is these actions have been accompanied by a discourse which has become very, very aggressive, promoting its own political system and criticizing Western democracy as being efficient and selfish and unable to tackle the crisis. So it has been accompanied by some disinformation campaign about the origin of the virus, accusing the US military to probably be having brought the virus to Wuhan in October last year at the time of the international military games, or even to have suspected that the virus took its origin in Italy, because Italy was later badly affected by the virus. Now, in France itself, the Chinese ambassador used the Twitter account of the Chinese embassy to accuse France and the personnel of French nursing homes for having abandoned old people in these nursing homes, and that led to diplomatic incidents with the French government. French Foreign Minister Le Drian summoning Bouchaier to the French Foreign Ministry for an explanation. So in the beginning, I would argue that in Europe, a number of countries, Italy, Spain, and of course Central European countries, China's assistance was welcome. But then later, because of this heavy propaganda and aggressive messaging, I think the Chinese campaign backfired against China itself, and that's led to a number of accusations against China, which well, you all know, but have been made public in the last few weeks by quite a number of countries. First of all, I mean, there's still a lot of questions regarding China's relationship with the WHO. Why did the WHO declare only on January 30th that this new epidemic was what we call the public health emergency of international concern? Why the WHO was so late in admitting human transmission? Why it was so late in admitting that the world was facing a pandemic that went until March 11th? So, and why did it support China when China decided to, well, try to put pressure on other countries, including the US, to not suspend air traffic with China, which was actually the first thing to do in order to prevent the epidemic from turning into a pandemic. So that's why the first issue. And then the other issue is that there's still a lot we don't know about the origin of the virus, what happened in the labs, which are located in the P3 and P4 labs, which are located in Wuhan. and also the magnitude of the epidemic. I mean, there are a lot of conflicting estimations for the number of cases in China. I've read in one of the US think tanks, estimation is 2.9 million cases, and maybe it's several 10,000 deaths instead of 85 or 80,000 cases and just 5,000, less than 5,000 deaths for China. Now, there's been also criticism for the, regarding the quality of the equipment delivered. Many of the masks and test kits delivered to Europe and other countries were not actually donations, they were sales. And then you've got that battle of narratives, which very quickly erupted. Now, the reason China accused the US of being at the origin of the virus is a statement by a senator who's well known for his very conservative views, Senator Cotton. It was not coming from the US and the Trump administration itself, but China reacted and sort of started a vicious circle of cross accusations between the US and China. And this, the Trump administration started using the Chinese flu concept or language to qualify the new epidemic. Now, there are also other incidents took place in China itself, which complicated China's relationship with Africa, with some cases of racial discrimination in Canton in April. China very quickly minimized the case and tried to reach out to African governments about we can combat that later, but I think it damaged Sino-African relations for some time. Then the next question, which also had to do with African countries and developing countries as a whole, which have become much more dependent than before upon China, is the question of debt relief and whether China will be ready to accept debt forgiveness or to reschedule the debts which a number of countries have accumulated with China, thanks to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And China accepted to reschedule the debt. It's debt with quite a number of, in principle, with quite a number of countries at the G20 meeting, but this needs to be negotiated at the bilateral level with quite a number of countries in the developing world, and it will take some time. One thing which China is pretty reluctant to do is to really accept debt forgiveness. China is more inclined to negotiate rescheduling, extending the reimbursement period, and China accepted with the G20 to freeze the interest payments until the end of this year, but beyond that, we don't know. So there's still a lot of negotiation to take place in the coming months about that debt relief issue. Now, I think political image of China is quite somewhat deteriorated in the global south because of that. And so the question is, this question of debt is becoming a burning issue for quite a number of countries. So now, the final issue is whether these COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the deterioration of U.S.-China relations, and whether we are now witnessing a new Cold War between China and the U.S. I think it's fair to say that the tensions started before the pandemic started. The competition, even the rivalry between China and the U.S. Includes a lot of different dimensions. There's an economic and trade dimension, but also technological dimensions, or strategic and ideological facets as well. So the big debate in the U.S. and elsewhere is, particularly in the U.S., is whether this COVID-19 crisis is going to speed up the decoupling of the Chinese and the American economy. Some people like Navarro, the trade advisor to Trump, pushing in that direction. Whether it's feasible remains to be seen. What is clear is that the Trump administration has intensified its pressure on China to know more about what really happened in China, regarding the COVID-19, but also it's part of because of the slowdown of the American economy and all the difficulties the Trump administration is facing at home, it has become China has become a real electoral issue across the board in the U.S. It will be very hard for Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, not to address that issue either. Now, beyond this election, the presidential election, which is coming in November, I think what we've seen in the U.S., you've got a growing bipartisan view that the engagement policy towards China is now dead, and that the U.S. should move towards a much more robust and maybe aggressive policy towards China. Whether it's Cold War or not, I mean, of course, the Democrats may be reluctant to use the term Cold War, but clearly the pressure is there, and it will keep intensifying in the coming years. And we have mentioned a few examples of that competition or confrontation. It includes, of course, the technological war between both superpowers, which includes the competition to find a new vaccine to fight against COVID-19. But also it has a very, very powerful geopolitical dimension, the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, with the Taiwanese election in January, and the inauguration of the Tsai Ing-wen's second term yesterday. Tsai Ing-wen was praised by Pompeo, the Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, and of course that has also fed the tension with China. Now the big question is whether this growing Cold War, new Cold War, because between the U.S. and China, is going to impact other countries or groups of countries like the European Union. And I think the jury is still out, but we've seen also, take the example of the European Union, countries taking more restrictive measures in terms of Chinese access to European technologies, Chinese acquisition of high-tech companies in Europe. And so you've got elements of a new Cold War, even if the EU position is still embracing maybe a more realistic form of engagement with China. If you look at the statement made by Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the EU, a few days ago, clearly he recognizes engagement is important, but at the same time he recognizes that China has become a systemic rival of the European Union in terms of political system and political values. So a few words of conclusion. Clearly, on the domestic stage, China's priority is to relaunch the economy, to save and create jobs, and to keep social stability. I don't think that the political system itself is in danger. I think there was an op-ed in today's Financial Times by Jamil Andolini, which says, the system is stable, and I agree with him that this, what I've called myself, this new authoritarian equilibrium has not been jeopardized by this recent crisis. But I think we have to draw a line between the regime's survival itself and Xi Jinping's political future. And Xi Jinping seems to be in a weaker position today, and that's something we can discuss more in the Q&A. We've seen, I mentioned earlier, less mentioned in the media. The decisions made by the Chinese leadership are indicative of a sort of tilting towards more reform, and that's something which will have probably an impact on Xi Jinping's ability to stay in power beyond 2022. Although I wouldn't bet today whether his term will be extended or whether he will be forced to retire in 2022-23. Now, the slowdown of the Chinese economy is going to slow down China's rise and aspiration to global leadership. What these crises have shown is clearly inability of the US to exert any kind of leadership on the international stage. But likewise, I don't think that the world is ready to accept China's leadership. That's why the world, in my view, is heading towards a G0 rather than G2 or a new G1 dominated by China. The Chinese ambition on international stage will also be more prudent and scaled down. And I take as an example the BRI. It's been, well, since 2018, indication that the BRI is going to be scaled down, but now even more so today. Now, just a word about decoupling. I don't think it's going to happen. But what we've seen in a number of sectors like the computer industry, the chip industry, we've seen a interesting development recently with the Taiwanese company SMC investing $2 billion US to build a new plant in Arizona in order to remain a key supplier of the US and probably also the US military in the future, away from moving away from China. So I don't think the US is out. We'll see how it goes, particularly if Joe Biden is elected, although maybe his chances of getting elected are rather small as we speak, but we have to be careful because November is still a few months ahead, away from today. Now, the WHO is going to be more scrutinized, and we've seen China making concessions here, accepting an independent review of the WHO action earlier this week, which show that the pressure exerted by the European Union, it started with Australia, by the way, and then Australia has been singled out by China as being too aggressive, but later the proposition has been sort of watered down a bit in order to be more accepted by more countries, but we've seen the majority of countries asking for a review of what the WHO action to fight against COVID-19, so China had to accept it. So one of the issues that's been mentioned in a number of media is the question of, can we sue China? I will just say it's very unlikely that those legal suits can become successful. But they are symptomatic. I mean, those attempts are symptomatic of a new mood and a new relationship with China in a number of Western countries. And this new mood has been clearly directly caused by the COVID-19 and the way China managed the COVID-19 at the beginning of the crisis, and tried to cover up the crisis or minimize the crisis before, and really informing the WHO and the rest of the world of the magnitude of this new health crisis. So that's where we are. I think in a way, and I will finish on that, the new Cold War can serve China's interest because it's helped the regime, the one-party system, to survive for a longer period of time. And this confrontation, ideological confrontation between China and the West is something which is also helping the party consolidating its domination of the Chinese society and theory of nationalism within China. So it's also a factor of stability for China itself. I will finish on that note, and now I'm open to Q&A. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Thank you.
Already four questions.
Yeah, actually.
How many questions?
If you click on the chat, you see four
Stop
questions.
sharing.
So no, not that.
Okay.
But it's okay. But the chat.
Can people talk, or do
They
I?
can, but some prefer typing.
Okay, there's a question about, okay, all right. Vincent Perrin is asking a question about the future of expectation for EU-China relations. I think we're facing, I mean, the EU is facing a more complicated relationship and conflictual relationship with China. If you just look at Joseph Borrell's op-ed in Le Monde and also article published in English at the same time. The EU has a voice, a strong voice in trade and economic, on trade and economic issues. Whether comprehensive investment treaty can be negotiated and endorsed by both sides in September in Leipzig remains to be seen. There was some hope that can be ironed out, but I have some doubts about even if it's approved, about the content of this agreement. More broadly, I think we are in a more conflictual relationship. And the problem with the EU is the EU is not united about China. I think it's hard to say that the EU has a very well-established and well-supported China policy. In spite of the statement made by Borrell a few days ago, different countries may have different China policy. I mean, among the best examples, the case of Hungary or Italy, who have developed much closer relationship with China, who have embraced the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and while other countries are much more reluctant to do so. So we shouldn't expect too much from the EU level, but key EU member states like Germany, France, and others may be more inclined to develop a more realistic, less naive, Macron would say, less naive relationship with China. Even if there is no, I don't think there is no intention to side on every issue with the United States. At the same time, that I don't think that the key EU member states are willing to adopt a position of neutrality between the US and China. So, because after all, we are NATO members, in spite of the reservation some countries have, but NATO, we are NATO members, we are US allies, and it's very hard to sort of adopt such a position of neutrality between US and China as the relationship becomes more tense and conflictual between China and the US. Okay, this is my first.
I have two questions here.
Okay.
The first one from our colleagues in history department, Raymond Lau. He asks, in your opinion, are we seeing the beginning of the end of Xi Jinping's China's dream in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis?
The beginning of the end of Xi Jinping?
No, it's dream.
Oh, China dream. Oh, yeah.
Dream. Right.
Well, that's a good point because there is less reference. There's been less reference to the China dream in the last few weeks. Yeah, that's right. But we have to be careful because all these slogans were endorsed by the latest party congress. The rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, China dream, the ambition of moving China closer to the central stage. All those objectives were endorsed by the party. So there is no reason for the party, at least on the paper, to abandon those slogans. But the China dream itself, yes, is less mentioned. And so that's something which, which probably indicates a weakening, slight weakening of Xi Jinping's position within the leadership. But we have to be careful because I don't think that there is any intention, as far as we speak, of changing leadership between two congresses. It never happened since the beginning of the reform era. So we have to wait for the next Congress to see what kind of leadership will come out.
Yeah, the next question comes from Ying Yi Hong regarding this. How would the COVID-19 pandemic affect mainland China's strategies towards Hong Kong? There seems to be a rush to increase control on Hong Kong in all aspects, like education and media, etc. So what is your analysis?
Yes, I mean, living in Hong Kong, what we witnessed, of course, is the fact that it looks the central authorities of China have taken advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic to tighten its screw on Hong Kong, its control over Hong Kong. Not to be fair, I would say China, Xi Jinping's decision to controlling Hong Kong more tightly preceded the COVID-19 crisis. It started at the end of the protest movement last year, even before that. But it started with Xi Jinping's accession to power in 2012. It's been gradual, but after the end of the protest movement in November, December last year, it was a decision made. Well, first of all, the fourth party plenary in November to tighten the screw, and then to change the leadership the Chinese leadership in China, and Chinese officials in charge of Hong Kong and Macau affairs. particularly Hong Kong. So with the appointment of the new liaison office director, Liu Huining in early January, and then the appointment of a new director for the Hong Kong and Macau affairs of Beijing in early February. Two guys who are senior in the party, Central Committee members, but who are also hardliners and very close to Xi Jinping himself. Xia Baolong, the head of the office in Beijing, is also very close to Xi Jinping. And the final decision which was taken also in February was to merge the liaison office in Hong Kong and Macau affairs office in Beijing, to the point that the Liu Huining is deputy director of the office in Beijing. So clearly, it's a much more hands-on policy which has been sort of introduced since January, and the COVID-19 crisis has sort of contributed to making more debatable decisions, like the symbolic arrest of 15 senior members of the Pan-Democratic camp, and the decision to retake control of the House Committee in the LegCo, and to table the national anthem law. So so on. I mean, there are a lot of decisions which have been all going in the same direction, which is to more tightly control Hong Kong.
I wonder, Chair, whether we could have we've got lots of questions from Zoom land. We could perhaps have one or two little comments here, and then perhaps go back to some questions. If I may, I'd just like to make a comment and a question. If people will excuse me on the who are following us from afar, my comment is quite simply, I remember the expression during one famous British crisis, and it was, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." And I think there's two dimensions of this, really. And I think, in a sense, there's clearly a narrative dimension, making sense of a crisis. And I think, in a way here, it's clear that Xi Jinping started off, perhaps, as you pointed out in your presentation, Jean-Pierre, went too far, really. Perhaps had some narrative leeway to start with, but clearly went too far, pushed too far. So, making sense of a crisis, 3 question marks, as the French would say. And the second one is making use of a crisis. Don't let a good crisis go to waste, in a sense. And I can see, again, I suppose it's a half-hearted conclusion, because to some extent, there has been a sense that there's been making use of a crisis, but perhaps that's also backfired. And I think that comes out very well in your presentation. But my question is a slightly provocative one. But there's this literature in political leadership about political tricksters. Now, a political trickster is someone who paradoxically undermines somewhat the system that brought him or her to power. And we can see that there's nothing, it's not a comment about China or anything, it's just a general thing about leadership. One of the paradoxes of leadership is that sometimes the conditions that bring someone to power are undermined. I mean, you might actually say Trump, in a sense, is a bit of a political trickster, because he sort of undermines the system that brought him to power. You could say this about various other people, and without actually saying, asking the question about Xi Jinping, because clearly in a sense, you sort of already answered it in a way. But is there a sense in which the particular style of leadership of Xi Jinping, just to leave it on the style, has it in any sense been undermined, if you like, or weakened somewhat by this crisis? That would be my question.
All right. Well, thank you, Elise. Very good point. Yes, I think China has tried to use the crisis, and try to provide a narrative about the crisis which serves China's interests and serve the Communist Party's interests within China. What is interesting is, as I mentioned earlier, within China, very quickly, very early on, there's been a recognition that some mistakes have been made. But later they will minimize those mistakes. And they will emphasize the fact that the Communist Party has learned lessons from those mistakes. And that's a good thing about the party, it keeps learning lessons and adapting. Yes, but the mistakes were made. Mm-hmm. And the mistakes were very serious, because those mistakes has, again, I think, contributed to turn this epidemic into a pandemic. So, who should be blamed? Is it the Chinese leadership? Is it local authorities? Is it the WHO? I think everybody is responsible. Even before, the Trump administration got involved, the European got affected by the crisis. So, the Chinese administration is very good at minimizing problems in order to, sort of make keep or turn the situation or give a more positive spin to the crisis. Then there's been a international diplomatic use of the crisis, and I would say an abuse of the crisis, which has backfired. China had had actually a choice. It could have provided support and given supplies to a number of countries, including Europe and elsewhere in the South, without trying to sort of use that diplomacy of generosity as a way to launch an anti-Western democracy campaign, an anti-democracy. And I think China would have gone out of the crisis with a much better image. That's been the case. So here I think they went too far. And now there's a debate in China about this, how sensible this wolf warrior diplomacy is. You've seen a number of international relations experts, including people who are pretty conservative, in the past they were pretty aggressive, like Yan Xuehong, or more independent-minded people like Shi Yinhong. They've been very critical of the Chinese leadership, that you've gone too far, and it has badly backfired. So that's, I think there is a lot of, there are behind closed doors a lot of debate about whether China should continue on that trajectory. And I think, in a way, Xi Jinping's speech to the WHO on Monday was already trying to take into account all those pressure, all those criticisms, and adopting a much less aggressive tone in his speech. And I think that we will see whether in the coming weeks, that tone will remain moderate, or whether we will keep, attacking the US. And there are many reasons for China to continue to attack the US, because the US has been very aggressive as well in the last few weeks. Yes.
Next question. Actually, there are two questions, more or less the same. About Taiwan. What is the position of Taiwan? Would the position be changed, or becoming a member of WHO? Taiwan.
Okay, Taiwan.
Yeah. Actually, maybe.
Taiwan. Taiwan has been very good at selling its success story as well. Taiwan has also embarked into a mass diplomacy. But a real success, in the sense that there was never been any lockdown in Taiwan. Taiwan has managed to control the number of cases to less than 500, number of deaths to I think 7, and now and Taiwan is very much back to normal, and there hasn't been any recession in Taiwan, actually, economic recession as far as now. Will it change? In other words, Taiwan's image has really improved, and a number of people and countries have started to put Taiwan on the map. But will it change Taiwan's status? Will it help Taiwan to reintegrating the international community, or even getting an observer seat in the WHO? I don't think so. And China will keep putting its veto to any kind of decision of that sort, because Taiwan has not recognized the so-called 92 consensus. The current Taiwanese administration government doesn't recognize that Taiwan is part of China. I think there is no way for Taiwan to rejoin the WHO, the assembly of the WHO, anytime soon, unless the Kuomintang comes back to power and clearly endorses the 92 consensus. So I don't think that for Taiwan its diplomatic isolation will come to an end because of this.
Next question from Université Libre de Bruxelles. Is there still a discussion about the number of victims in China?
Must be. Yes, there is a discussion, but again, it's very hard. it's very hard to have a more reliable figure. What we've seen is there's been an adjustment of the official figures regarding Wuhan and Hubei, Wuhan city, which was made public a few weeks ago. And then China decided, the China health authorities decided to include the non-symptomatic cases in the data. But it has not really changed the overall data much. So people who don't believe, and a lot of people in the West don't believe the Chinese figures, they remain very suspicious. But I don't know whether one day we'll know the exact figure, know the magnitude of the epidemic in China itself.
Okay, next question from Stephen Alexander. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why CCP disorder may partly explain the party's aggressive discourse abroad?
Well, yes, that's an hypothesis that I think there was. Every time you've got problems inside China and you see a more confrontational relationship between the party state and the society, at least coming from some segments of the society, the party's reaction, a knee-jerk reaction, will be to stir up nationalism and to become more aggressive on the international stage. And that's been the case since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. With all the side effects of becoming too like a world warrior on outside of China. So, but that's what I would say. Now it's not the only reason, because the Chinese foreign policy has become much more assertive for some time, including before Xi Jinping came to power. Xi Jinping just confirmed this trend, and so COVID-19 was, I think, has been used by Xi Jinping and the leadership to again try to silence any kind of opposition and or criticism within China. And I gave a few cases, just one slide, but the number of people who've been silenced by it's indicative also of the magnitude of the social medias, all the messages, critical messages which have appeared, and later very quickly for some of them taken down from the social media in China. So something happened, and that's why then the party state decided to sort of very quickly change its the way it's managed the local resentment and rehabilitated, for instance, the UN. I can see another question. Other question maybe are on the table.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Professor. Recently, I read your latest book, China Tomorrow.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, in your conclusions, you claim that it's very unlikely in the near future for the regime to change. Would you change or alter your conclusions after this coronavirus outbreak?
Well, thank you, John. Yes, it's a very good question, because actually I didn't have time in my presentation to sort of echo that conclusion. And I think the regime with that crisis, and more generally with the slowdown of the economy and the economic stagnation or recession in China's entered since the beginning of this year, is a real test. And it's going to test whether my hypothesis is right or wrong, because I mentioned in the chapter 6 of my book whether an economic crisis can precipitate a regime change in China. And my conclusion is it's unlikely, because the parties, as other attributes or other can use other weapons to stay in power. Well, one is clear, is well known, is this techno security. It's a huge, vast network of technical means the party has accumulated in order to control the population, to spy on everyone's opinion. The other thing is that a lot of people in China, including the middle class, a lot of the middle classes, they still very much prioritize stability and security. So one of the missions, but also the promises made by the party is we're going to keep the society stable. And if the party loses power, that we're opening the door to anarchy, to disorder, to civil war. So that kind of threat is still working very well to some extent, to sort of keep the societies behind the party. And the other thing is nationalism. I mean, clearly in that case, nationalism has been also used as a way of, as a glue around the party leadership. So yes, economic development is one of the key foundations of the party's legitimacy, but that's not the only one. Stability and nationalism are the two other pillars of the party's legitimacy.
Thank you.
So we'll see.
So thank you very much, Jean-Pierre, for your insightful presentation. You mentioned a lot the China-EU relations,
yes,
and how the COVID-19 has impacted on this relation. What about China-Africa? And you mentioned in your
yes.
slide that there has been a lot of distrust, including with the Global South, but what about African countries?
Yes, I didn't have much time to go into the details, and here I would be more cautious. What happened in Canton and Guangzhou was clearly a negative impact because it had much more echo and it triggered a lot of reactions around the continent to the point that governments, a number of African governments, all the way to South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and so on, wrote a letter to the Chinese government and so they were under the pressure of their own society to move and to say something. Now and then you got the tech problem, which is also having pressure on China. And but I would be cautious because if you in the case of Africa, African governments have remained pretty dependent on China. It's not only because China has built this long-term relationship with African governments and countries, but also because these countries have again become, in terms of infrastructure projects, trade, and also diplomatic relationships, very, very dependent on China. So I think African government themselves will try to manage that crisis. I mean, what happened, but at the same time, I think they will try to preserve keep a good relationship with China because they need it. So in other words, they have less leverage. They have less to change the relationship with China. They will concentrate very much on the tech issue more than these racial problems or discrimination problems. Yes, Chris.
Yes, I've got a more general question, if I may. It's not precisely on the future of China as much as it is on the future of the whole international system. I would be really interested in your insights regarding the hypothesis of deglobalization. More and more experts these days invoke this idea. They talk about this recent lockdown of economies. Politicians in many countries suddenly realize that their societies are dependent on the production that has been outsourced mainly to China. So what do you think about that? Because I have to say, personally, I'm very skeptical when it comes to deglobalization.
You're right to be skeptical. I don't think decoupling is going to happen. What I think is you may see some decoupling in some key sectors, like high tech, like strategic products. But even the American economy and American companies are so dependent on China, and not only China but the rest of the world, that I don't see deglobalization taking place, and even decoupling is going to be very selective. Now, if you take the example of PPE and medical equipment, masks, and so on, or even drugs, education, I think there are three ways of adjusting in the future. One is to constitute stocks, what we call strategic stocks. We do that with oil, we can do that with masks, with any kind of, to better be prepared for the next epidemic or health crisis. The second thing is to diversify production lines and not to remain over dependent on China, because what this crisis have highlighted is
all eggs into one basket.
Yes, I mean it's really a too high dependency, exaggerated dependency from China itself, and not because of China. I mean it's because of a lot of companies, including American 3M, which decided to delocalize these production lines to China years ago. And when Trump said you should move your production lines back to the US, I'm sorry, but the production line in China is to serve the US market, and the US factories manufacture products for the South American market. We have our own division of labor, and we're not going to change. Well, we can change, but the cost is going to come. And so that's the diversification, not to be over dependent on China, is another answer. And then you have this more environmental friendly argument, which is you have to move production lines closer to the consumer in order to save the cost, reduce your carbon footprint, and so on. These arguments will continue to develop and to become more to get more support in the future. But deglobalization, I don't see it clearly. It's going to be very partial, including decoupling. So, more questions? Let me see. It's BRI. Should I start with the end?
Yeah, just go ahead, please.
There's a question with BRI. Yes. Okay. The BRI. I mentioned the BRI. I think there's been a redesign of the BRI since 2018. As I said in my presentation, it's already pretty much scaled down. Now the problem is debt, and they look at what's happening in countries like Pakistan. They want to. They can't pay back their debt. They want to put on hold quite a number of projects, and China itself has less financial resources to fund the BRI. So and the policy banks like the Exim Bank, the China Development Bank, they are quite reluctant to provide new loans while they're trying to get back the money from previous loans, and it's going to get harder for them to get back to them. So the BRI will stay. I think it's part of the party constitution. It's Xi Jinping's pet project. It's not going to be abandoned anytime soon, but it's going to continue to be scaled down, and even more so than before the COVID-19. And the Taiwan question. Now, I don't know if you've heard the Tsai Ing-wen's inauguration speech yesterday. She wants to, hoping to have a more stable relationship with China, and that both China and Taiwan can peacefully coexist for a long time to come. That's maybe a wishful thinking, in the sense that I don't think that China is going to abandon its dream or its project to unify with Taiwan, and that more political and military pressure over Taiwan will be exerted in the coming years. I think. Now, there are some debates in China. We've seen in the last few weeks some dissenting voices trying to warn the party and Xi Jinping against any precipitate decision to launch a military operation against Taiwan. And I think it's kind of veiled criticism of Xi Jinping, and who, at the 90th Party Congress, wanted to speed up the reunification process and to sort of link up very closely the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation to the unification with Taiwan. Actually, China has demonstrated that it can rejuvenate and can succeed, can become more prosperous without Taiwan. So what should it jeopardize its own modernization and rise to superpower status in launching a very adventurous military operation in Taiwan? And I think the best kind of obstacle to any kind of confrontation over Taiwan is the fact that the U.S. has a security commitment toward Taiwan, and it's very hard to envisage two nuclear powers getting involved into a direct military confrontation over Taiwan. And that's maybe the best kind of guarantee that there won't be any war in the coming years. But you have to say yes. You agree with it? I don't know if control that. But let me.
Jean-Pierre, repeat the question.
Okay, whether the WHO, yes, a lot of Hong Kong activists claim that the WHO is controlled by China. I don't know whether a lot of Hong Kong activists. Well, there's been a lot of debates around the world, about the, China's influence over the WHO. Now, there are a number of factors which we have difficulty completely understanding. Tedros himself, I think, plays a big part in that close relationship between China and the WHO. He's an Ethiopian politician who, in his youth, was close to Mengistu, was a communist, so he had some close relation with China himself. When he was health minister, Ethiopia had under Mengistu, under Meles Zenawi was developing a very, very strong strategic partnership with China. So he's close to China, and that's partly, it explains, at least in part, why the WHO has been so much ready to cooperate with China. The other problem is that the WHO, it's not the first time the WHO is failing, actually, or is reacting too slowly to a new epidemic. I've studied a bit the Ebola crisis in 2014, 2015, and if you can read the number of articles criticizing the WHO for having reacted too slowly, it's endless. I mean, tons of articles were published at the time criticizing the WHO. At the time, the WHO was directed by Margaret Chan, the former Hong Kong Health Secretary.
Same with the anthrax.
And so that's the problem, because it's a rather weak organization. It's a multilateral organization which is part of the UN system, and the UN system is weak as long as we don't have the P5 agreement. If the 5 permanent members of the Security Council agree to move forward, there will be some action. Otherwise, the WHO, well, any kind of UN system organization will act very, very slowly. So that's not new. And as in most cases, the WHO is very dependent of the country where the health crisis erupted, and China was in the driving seat. China accepted to give the WHO what he wanted to give in terms of information. So, how can the UN system organization kind of force China to provide information which it doesn't want to give the UN? That's very hard. So now we'll see how it goes, because there's pressure for conducting this review of the WHO action, whether it's going to change really fundamentally change the way it operates. We have to be cautious and not to expect too much from that review of this.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. So basically, what do you think China will learn from this crisis? Because we all know that maybe the regime is still relatively stable. Regime change not likely happen in the near future, and the leadership the composition might also relatively stable. But which part of the system might be changed a little bit because of this crisis. Because I myself, the observation is China every time, crisis management, basically they worry about, the leadership worries about the survival of the regime so much, and whenever dealing with the crisis, immediately they turn to their old ways of doing things. That's also the argument of my book on crisis management in China. So basically they were immediately turned back to the ways they are very accustomed with, to use those familiar tools to deal with all those disaster and crisis. And then, they will make a successful story. It's always just like make good use of the crisis and tell, like the narrative it's always a successful story. And many countries, they learn from crisis maybe afterwards, because I think every country, when you deal with the crisis, immediately you need to turn back to some familiar tools. But they take lessons afterwards when they try to have some deliberation, and the opposing party watchdogs try to dig out the stories. But in China, afterwards, the leadership usually worry about the stability so much, so they try to silence different voices. And it seems the pattern that I would not say they never learn, because they install some kind of new system and the new laws to deal with each disaster. Like for the earthquake, actually they had a whole law and a new whole system to deal with the earthquake. Seems it's not working this time. So since the lesson they taken before not really effectively to be applied in the next one. So I'm just wondering, what your observation that what might be learned from, like sincerely might be learned, and really the changes will take place in which part of the system?
It's a very good question, because it reminds me something I haven't mentioned. I think that China has made progress compared to 17 years ago at the time of the SARS crisis. And as you know, in the aftermath of the SARS crisis, they put in place a mechanism in order to alert, another mechanism in order to react very swiftly to any kind of epidemic. That mechanism didn't work. It was short circuit by local authorities, and everyone, or by politicians, but by party secretaries at the local level, but also I think to some degree at the national level. So what it shows, and I don't think it's going to change, there is one bureaucracy which is rather weak in China, which is the National Health Commission. It will remain weak. And I don't think it's going to really change. This alert mechanism is not going to work that well in next time. I don't trust too much. Really, I don't expect much improvement actually on that. Now, where maybe the regime and the party is going to change a bit more is how to deal with society's voices, dissenting voices, and resentments among the society. Well, one typical reaction, of course, is the silent voices. That's been going on. There's nothing new here. But I think they will be more maybe agile and fast, swift in reacting to people who want to alert the leadership in order to avoid having, being forced to make decisions as they did to rehabilitate people who have been reprimanded by the police. So I don't know what kind of again what kind of procedure they can introduce to do that, but clearly they I think they're a bit more worried about the urban middle class reaction than before. So they will find ways to sort of better know in advance and preempt any kind of negative reaction from society. Because, I mean, again, something happened in Wuhan and elsewhere in China in February, which really tarnished Xi Jinping's image and his image among some segments of the society. Now, it's very hard today, as we speak, to evaluate, how deep that resentment and that mistrust was. But there was much more mistrust at the time. And maybe this mistrust is over now, and maybe they've recovered some kind of level of trust among the society, which we have to be careful because, and people I've interviewed, coming from China, and said in February it was very bad. After March, it looks like even Xi Jinping's status or image had improved. But the party has grown some conclusion from that, and I think again we'll see that Xi Jinping is in an even less secure position before the party.
Okay, our time is actually up now. I'm conscious of the fact that quite a few questions were not answered.
How much time do we have?
Well, we formally finished, but we can carry on. I mean, we're not
because I've seen there is a Rocky Shaw asking a question.
Yes. Try and answer some questions.
Well, can we get any clue in terms of political system? Yes, I mean, whether our democracy, I mean, you've got that general question, are democracies better prepared or less well prepared to fighting against or controlling the spread of epidemic? I think it's very hard to get to sort of jump to any kind of decided conclusion on that issue. You've got some democratic countries that have been pretty badly managed the crisis, and democratic countries in Asia, I mean, have in mind Taiwan and Singapore, and South Korea, and Japan to some degree have been much better prepared. And what is important, I mean, the lesson I draw from those cases is the fact that they reacted very swiftly, and they were informed very early on about the dangers and the risk of human transmission of that virus. And that's why they reacted properly and in time. Why in the West, and in Europe, there was, I think, a lack of awareness and maybe and maybe some people were not cautious enough, including within the government, about the dangers of the virus. So that's my conclusion on that issue. Finally, yes, no, that's the final question. I already answered it. Okay, so we'll see, but the Taiwan is a good example of how the crisis can be managed.
If I may collectively join, in fact, everybody who's been able to accompany this webinar on the Zoom, so thank you everybody for your participation, and it's a pity we weren't able to get back to all of your comments, but thank you for this. I thank you, Professor Cabestan, and all my colleagues for participating in the first of 4 seminars, but thank you very much for this, for illuminating, informing, challenging, interrogating our collective wisdom. So thanks for that, and in the customary manner, let's finish with a brief round of applause.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye, and talk to you next time.